Hi, my name is Walter Lachman. I was born in Berlin, Germany in May 1928. I came here in September 46, and you had an opportunity when you became a citizen to change your first or your last name. And on the back of my certificate is a little notation that the applicant's name has been changed from Wolfgang Lewis to Walter Lewis. And today, I have to be honest with you, I wish they hadn't done it. Wolfgang Packer's now a great name, and in those days, I really wanted to be American, and I thought Wolfgang would be an awful name. So, when you're young, you make decisions that are not always correct. In fact, you make decisions that are not always correct when you're older too. So, whatever. In 1933, when I was almost 6 years old, a man by the name of Hitler came to power in Germany, and he decided he didn't like Jews. My father was very right-wing politically. He always said we're Germans first and Jewish second, and he had an Iron Cross of the First World War, and he said, they won't touch war veterans, and they won't do this and they won't do that. He was surprised that the German people would stoop to that kind of gutter politics. He just was misguided. And then as things got worse and worse, he kept saying, well, we leave on the last train. But of course, by the time he got sick and died, his business had essentially been closed. Nobody ever closed his business. There was no government order, but he lost all his customers, so there's nothing there. My father's family and also most of them, my mother's family, had probably lived in Germany for 10, 12 generations. We did celebrate the holidays. We did go to my grandma every Friday night for Shabbat, and she made the same thing every Friday night, like for years. And we went to the synagogue on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and maybe some other holidays, but we were not regular synagogue goers. But my parents probably had as many non-Jewish friends as they had Jewish friends. Of course, all his non-Jewish friends were either afraid to talk to him or didn't want to talk to him. There was a fear amongst most Gentiles were really not avid Nazis, but they knew that if they got seen talking to a Jew or walking to a Jewish house, there could be repercussions. Somebody may sneer at them or may say, you're Jew lovers, or that kind of thing. So Hitler came to power in 1933. I still remember looking out the window and we could see a torchlight parade of his supporters being jubilant about his ascension to power. And then as things got worse and worse, when Jews couldn't have pets anymore. I had a little dog, and to be honest with you, I don't remember his name. It was a little terrier. My father had to take him down to some place, and I don't know what they did with the dogs. They probably put him down. That bothered me more than anything else. I couldn't go out to play. All the other kids went out in the street and played in the street. When I tried to do that, they would beat me up because I was a Jew. They took my bicycle, and then I had this terrible fear. I told you earlier, we went to public school for 3 years, or maybe 4, and then the rest of the time went to Jewish school. The Jewish school was not in my neighborhood, so I had to take an elevated train every day. And between the elevated train station where I got off, there was a walk to the school. And the Gentile boys were always waiting for us. They didn't do any serious harm to us, but they gave us little cuffs and little jeered at us, took our books and threw them in the river a couple of times. We had to cross the bridge. And I started devising all various ways to go to school, and I was still petrified. There were constant restrictions of Jews. Every month there was something different. Jewish doctors could no longer treat Gentile patients. Jewish dentists could no longer treat Gentile patients. It was like a news tightening because every few weeks there was a new regulation that impacted Jews. Jews could only go shopping at certain times when the stores were not too busy. And then, of course, came the Jewish Star. So I probably got the Star at the end of 1940, beginning of 41. When you wear a badge, laugh at you, point at you, make fun, they might not necessarily do anything really bad, but it's not nice to be made fun of. When my father died, I went to live with my grandma. Really, life was awful. And I have to tell you, in a way, in a morbid sort of a way, I kind of looked forward to that resettlement. I thought we'd go to somewhere where it'd be new and different and beautiful, and well, of course, you know how that turned out. That didn't work out that way. They sent us a registered letter that Recher Schwartz and Wolfgang Lachman should have to report resettlement center. And you had to bring one suitcase. My grandma helped me pack it. I don't remember what she put in there. I was a young 13. I never went to camp, to sleepaway camp. I never wanted to leave my parents. All the Gentile kids were playing on the street, so we couldn't go out. So I was basically pretty unsophisticated, unwise 13-year-old. The resettlement center turned out to be a synagogue that had been not destroyed in Kristallnacht. And the Gestapo, of course, looked through all the suitcases we brought in this resettlement center. They had put blankets on the floor, and we slept in the blankets. And that's where I saw my first person die. On the blanket near us, there was a man who just had a heart attack. I mean, nobody did anything to him, and then died. And well, that was an experience for a 13-year-old. But and the next morning, they loaded us into trucks, drove us to a freight terminal. They put us into freight cars. And you need to remember that it was in January 21st. It's cold. Of course, there was no heat in the cars either. You've probably seen freight cars. They've got like, on one end, they have like a little window, and that window had barbed wire on it. I really don't think I was that cold. There were so many of us in there that, of course, smelled terrible, but the cold was not the worst thing. When we arrived in Riga, they opened the doors and said, out, 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 out. They moved us into the apartments. Now, it's not that we got an apartment each. My grandma and I were assigned a kitchen with two other people. We slept on the floor. On each floor there was one toilet. There was a gravity toilet, where basically it's a hole in a pipe that leads down. And unfortunately those had gotten frozen because there was no heat in those houses. So that was toileting was a problem. Voluntarily said, I want to go to work. So they said, okay, we'll put you to sorting clothes. We sorted a lot of civilian clothes, and it turned out that those were the clothes that the Latvian Jews had worn, the 30,000 Latvian Jews. Well, the worst part of all of this, when I came home on February 5th, and my grandma in there. And, you know, that was my one anchor to normality. And she was the only person I had. And all of a sudden there's this I was a little fat kid, you know, I was really kind of on the heavy side. That didn't last very long, that went away pretty quick. But here I am. I have nobody to tell me, do this or don't do that. I'm in the little kitchen with two strangers. I go to work every day and I work with strangers. And there's nobody that I love and nobody who loves me. That was the most horrible few days. I heard rumors that they had moved the elderly people to a canning factory in a place called Dünemünde, which I later found out didn't even exist. I mean, there was no such place. And what they had done is they had brought them to a forest location nearby where they had graves, mass graves already dug, and some people got gassed in the vans and some people got shot. No, first I thought she would come back. Or maybe I could go there. Maybe I asked them at the labor office, could I go there to this canning factory? They said, no, you can't go there. You've got to stay where you are. And I tell you how I found out it wasn't true, because I kept working at that clothing sewing thing. And then one day I saw my grandma's gray coat with a little Persian collar, and I knew she was gone. And then I came home and probably cried for a couple of days, but gradually, you know, you get used to anything and everything. So for a while then, I started to just continue to work, and my main concern was to get enough food. At that point, I had no hope. I just, and I had a hard time thinking about anything other than tomorrow, because we were very hungry and very tired. All you want to do is have enough food the next day and survive. I grew up very quickly within a few months. I was small and I was young and I was, I've never been strong. If you had anything, you better slept on it or put it under your pillow, because if you didn't do that, if you put it on the shelf, it wouldn't be there the next day. We were so concerned with food and their own well-being and their own survival. Food we got normally was a lot of turnips, red beets, and frozen potatoes. And you know, gradually you learn all the little tricks. So all this stuff, I became streetwise very quickly. All of a sudden there was an announcement that the ghetto would be dissolved and we would have to go into concentration camp. And the concentration camp's name was Kaiserwald. We would receive a new number, and you know, we got a number when we got to the ghetto, and then we got a new number, which was sewn on our clothes. We had shaved heads, and we had no clothing other than the striped uniforms, gray and blue stripes, and it was a jacket that buttoned in the front. I think the pants might have had elastic, because we had no suspenders or anything like that. So they must have either we had a belt or a string or elastic or something to hold the pants up. We heard rumors and we heard the sound of artillery, and the Russians were getting closer. So we moved to a place called Libau, which is on the coast. The other people who they didn't want were moved to a concentration camp in Gdansk, Danzig, where most of them didn't survive. They moved the clothing depot to Libau. You know, the Russians by that time were really getting close to us and for the Germans, and they came over every night in their little planes and they bombed Libau. They decided, which was really a miracle, but normally you would have thought they would shoot us and get rid of us. But they decided they were going to take us back to Germany, and we got to Hamburg. And Hamburg by that time was totally bombed out. It was horrible. And the guy on shore said, "Well, why you bring me these Jews? What am I going to do with them? I don't know where to put them." So to make a long story short, they put us in an actual prison. One day, probably I would say it was January 45, they drove me and a few other guys to Bergen-Belsen. Bergen-Belsen was indescribable. By that time, there was no hygiene at all in Bergen-Belsen. There was really very little water, there was no food, there was a typhus epidemic. The Germans really didn't do any terrible things to us there, because they were, frankly, were afraid to go into the camp for fear they would be infected with typhus. Meanwhile, it was getting a little warmer, so every day we were outside the barracks and lay down on the ground. And then at night we crawled back in, and we get a little weaker every day and a little sicker and had more diarrhea. And so finally it got to a point where we knew the end had come for the Germans, because we saw these planes flying over the camp, and you've never seen a sight like that. 300 or 400 planes flying in formation and making a very loud noise, and they were going towards Germany and then coming back. They had the circle, red, white, and blue circle, and we looked at the planes. We thought, "That's great, terrific, wonderful, but will we make it?" And then finally, one day in April, we saw tanks coming with stars, and some was around British symbols. The circle was red, white, and blue. And I said to myself, my God had sent me a miracle, but will I live long enough to enjoy it? But by then I was just dragging myself. I couldn't even walk. When the British liberated Bergen-Belsen, they found 13,000 unburied dead in Bergen-Belsen, and another 10,000 died between the liberation and the next couple of months. So it was horrible. And they disinfected us because we were full of lice, of course, and then they moved us into what had been a German army camp. There, we had sheets, we had regular beds. We did not get much medical care because it wasn't an advancing army. They didn't have a bunch of doctors. They had some doctors who were taking care of the troops, but they never expected to find this kind of thing. So actually I got better on my own. The body has, I guess, coping mechanisms. So 88 pounds. I wished I could weigh a little less now. And I would say at least half of the people who had been in that camp died, if not 60 or 70%. It was a horrible, horrible camp. All that I had experienced before didn't even begin to compare with Bergen-Belsen. I really started thinking more about the Holocaust after I retired. Nobody could imagine how bad this whole situation was going to be. And I think most Nazis probably even couldn't imagine what could ultimately happen. I don't think in 36, 37, 38, people even German people, even Nazis, could have possibly imagined that ultimately 6 million Jews would be killed and just exterminated, just gassed. It's not human. It's a horrible, horrible Holocaust. Unfortunately, this horrible thing happened in Germany, and the Germans have to bear the guilt of that for hundreds of years. And they know it, and they're bearing it. I don't blame all Germans. I blame the Nazis, and I blame bad people in Germany, and there are probably plenty. But I cannot blame all Germans. And I know some Jewish people say they would never drive a German car, or they would never do this, never do that, never go to Germany. I have been to Germany several times. My parents are both buried there. I like to go to the cemetery and visit them. But I do not blame all Germans. I don't want to dwell on the Holocaust. The only reason I would talk about it is because maybe somehow, somewhere, somebody will hear the story and they will realize that it's really true, that it really happened. And maybe I was convince somebody that you shouldn't hate people, that you should really respect every living human being, no matter what color, no matter what religion, no matter what gender, no matter what orientation, that you should never look down on others. I know that's a horrible fault we human beings have. We always think we're a little better than either A or B or C. So we're all the same, and treat us all the same. That's the one message I have.